let's break down this modular synthesizer cover of Papu Tree. We're going to start over here with the tape player, and it's just playing a short tape loop from the start of the original track by Alessandro Coronas, which is a song from Mutazione by De Gute Fabrik. And I've taken the vocal ramp from the start of the song and I've pitched it up and down. So it starts in the D and it goes to A, back and forth as the song goes on. And occasionally you'll get a kind of cymbal ramp to show that a phrase has ended or something like that. About halfway through this tape, so the first half of the tape is exactly that over and over again. The second half of the tape, if we can get to it, is going to have the cymbal ramp every measure. So it both kind of intensifies the song, but then also is really useful for this kind of ambient part that we'll do at the end. So it kind of sounds like that. So let's stop that and rewind it. We'll get back to this later. I'm going to actually get it back to the beginning, and then I'll cue kind of 3 seconds of blank tape at the start of it. It'll take a second to get there. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that will be ready for us when we want. And let's go through some of the other instruments. I'm going to detach a few things here, turn off a few things so we can kind of go through module by module. Let's see. Oh yeah, and this needs to be here. Good. So the first thing maybe we'll look at is the guitar. So we can follow the green cables to figure out how the guitar is working. It kind of starts with a rhythm from Ham's New Workout down into Ornament and Crime in sequence mode, and it has this kind of 12 beat, it's actually kind of like a 24 beat triplet pattern that goes between the A and the D chords that the tape is following. That control voltage comes up here to rings to control these notes that it's playing, and rings is a resonator. It's set in sympathetic strings mode here, and also quad polyphonic, so we're going to hear these plucks kind of resonate together and sound over one another, 4 plucks at a time before they're kind of cut off. But we're actually getting this really kind of like crunchy, overdriven sound, and the reason for that, rings doesn't normally sound like this, is we're sending its odd and even outs into beads, which is a texture synthesizer that we'll get to in a second. What's going on though is beads has a manual volume mode that you can do by holding down the mode select and using the feedback knob to attenuate your signal. So maybe this rings would normally sound something like this. Kind of like a clean pluck sound, but we can really crank it. So I like to pick like some kind of middle ground between those two. Something like this, where we're still getting those kind of almost like feedback overtones, but we're not really blowing out our mix. And this kind of gives it enough texture to kind of stand alone as an instrument. All of the modules I'll be kind of demoing in this patch kind of have 2 phases, 2 or 3 phases. We could call this phase 1. Phase 2, it's going to add something new, and phase 3, it's going to kind of become washed out and more ambient. So the new thing we're going to add to all of these instruments is actually coming from one place. It's following this white cable here, and all these white cables in the top of links is actually like a pretty complicated pattern coming out of Pamela's New Workout. Basically, 3 here is a smooth random pattern, but it's it's using an AND logic with 2, which is a Euclidean pattern only at the end of each phrase, so that the smooth random will actually only come through to links at the end of each phrase. And what that means is once these are plugged in, in the case of the guitar, we're sending the smooth random to its structure, which is kind of like what strings are in resonance with the main chord. And it's going to kind of bend through all of these different overtone series to kind of get the steel guitar-like twang at the end of each phrase in the middle of this track. Finally, we're going to really kind of wash this out towards the end with beads reverb, which sounds something like this. It's like a really lush reverb. It's just one knob, but it controls a bunch of different kind of features. I think it's kind of a low pass filter and a room size and a decay tail, all kinds of stuff. So that's what the guitar is doing, basically the green cables in this particular patch. Let's turn that off. And while we're on beads, let's look at the kind of organ sound going on here. So beat starts out here, and basically there is a control voltage changing what time the knob is set to, and that is actually panning between a frozen sample from the original Papu Tree song, something from the first measure that's also going between A and D to kind of be in harmony with both the tape player and the guitar sound. And we're getting a kind of rhythm here from marbles, the T section, which we'll get into in a second, that is going to seed, and we're in unlatched seed mode, so it's going to play kind of this beat. The way that this, I have this already plugged in, this modulation, it's going to increase its density at the end of each phrase, and when we get to the middle of the song, we'll also crank it up, so it'll be 2 octaves higher and kind of punch through the mix a little bit and give us a little bit more energy in the middle of the song. When it comes toward the end of the song, we'll bring it back down and again add that kind of cloud of reverb around this to get this kind of washed out ending. So that is what's going on with both the guitar and the organ. And the tape, which are all kind of like the melody. Let's transition to the rhythm now and talk a little bit about that. So we'll start with the drums. And the drums are a little bit more complicated in this patch than I normally do them. They start over here in marbles in the T section, which is a series of random gates. I'm not using deja vu or freezing any part of marbles this time. It's just going to kind of do this random pattern. It's in red mode here, which is a kind of kick and snare patterns. And they're organized with the bias knob in a series of different patterns. And so at the end of every phrase, we're kind of tweaking the bias knob with the same smooth random that's making the guitar kind of do the steel guitar textures and increasing the density of beads. So how the drums work is the snare is coming out from marbles into blinds, which is an attenuator. And to get this in a triplet pattern, I'm taking the downbeat from Pam's and using that to trigger the kick. Those are being kind of attenuated, inverted, and summed by blinds, and then sent up to change the model of plates. We're also sending the same set of triggers that are triggering the organ sound to get the hi-hat going. So this is always kind of playing some kind of beat. Where this starts to get a little bit more complicated is where we send these sounds. So for one, Plaits out is going to Blades, which is this kind of dual multi-mode filter, and we'll call it kind of filter 1 and filter 2. We're using these as 2 separate filters in this particular patch. What filter 1 is doing is it is not just receiving the audio rate signal from Plaits, it's also receiving CV gates from the kick and the snare, going to its drive and resonance to get different textures based on which drum is playing. So you have one set of Blades parameters for the kick one set of Blades parameters for the snare, and then a default set when neither of those are happening for the hi-hat, which is really nice. I'm just using stack cables and multing them over to Blades, and then using the built-in attenuators in Blades to kind of punch those up and down. Noticing our resonance attenuator wasn't up very high. Oh, there might be a reason for that. If the gate overlaps a little bit with the signal coming here, we get this kind of high-pitched sound, which maybe we don't want right now. So we'll leave that. The other thing going on is I'm actually taking, let's see. I'm taking the out of Blades, and we're still following these kind of blue cables, and I'm actually putting it into the 4th channel of blinds, and I'm applying another snare gate. So not only is the snare gate changing the frequency, but it's turning on and off this final channel of blinds so that I can mult in another snare, which will be panned slightly differently. So here we have like a additional snare sound on top of the snare, and importantly, since it was like a kind of single channel audio signal coming out, now I have a stereo signal to work with because I have the snare separate from the rest of the drums. Finally, the last thing I do is I add to this kind of percussion section a bass sound. And the bass is the purple cables. So what's going on here is we're bringing the bass drum signal in terms of its gate, its rhythm, down to control a segment of stages, which is basically doing an attack and release envelope. The other thing we're doing is we're also triggering every, looks like 24 beats, another set of stages that are in sequence mode to change the note of the bass. So the note is going over to Tide's V-oct in, and the envelope we're generating is going up here to Veils, which we'll talk about in a second. So Tides is going to be in audio rate mode to provide this bass voice. This is something I do in a lot of my patches. But interestingly, we're not only kind of attenuating these drums up here in Veils, so we can kind of control the volume of all of them. Veils is kind of a quad VCA, but those sounds are also being summed, at least the main drum sound and the bass, by kinks. And this is kind of an interesting choice because kinks doesn't have like a good kind of mixer. What it does have is it has a logic circuit. You can't really see it, it's buried here in cables. But the logic circuit is an analog kind of and/or. And what we're doing is we're sending the bass sound and the drum sound into this logic, and it's adding this additional grit because it's basically doing like an audio rate and operation where or I think it's an audio rate or operation where the maximum signal at any one time at an audio rate is being sent to our final mixer. So you can hear that it sounds one way with just the bass, one way with just the drums, but when you combine the two, you get this kind of like burpy or crunchy texture that just adds a little bit more grit on top of the wave folding and drive and filter and resonance that Blades is doing to our drums here. And of course the additional snare, which isn't going through kinks. So on top of that kind of percussion section, the final thing that's part of this track, and I'll unplug these once more, is a little bit of auxiliary percussion, which I like to do down on this Disting MK4. And the way this is being produced, it's the gray cables sending control voltages from marbles, which would normally be the bass drum kick, but I chose to do just a kind of easy triplet pattern on the kick to kind of keep the track together. So that's getting sent out from marbles, and then we have just a very simple Euclidean pattern being sent out from Pam's. It might not even be a Euclidean pattern. It might just be along with the bass drum or the kick drum. I think it's just playing every triplet downbeat. So these are being sent over, and they're playing taiko drum samples on the Disting NK4. But when we add to this our modulation source, going to change what samples are being played at the end of each measure to get these kind of sports day shouts. So this is kind of how the percussion kind of starts one way, and then we add these shouts in the middle, and the percussion is being routed along with the tape through a shimmer effect on the FX aid, and when we crank that up, we can get this really washed out pattern where the kind of attack of those drums almost goes away, and we'll use that for the ambient section in the end. So that's all the different sounds happening. I'm trying to think if I forgot any. I'll pull these right now to kind of get us set back to where we want. Let's see. Oh, there is one sound I didn't go through. Let's unplug these. It's a pretty important one. It's the lead melody. So this is pretty interesting. It's a little bit of a complex thing going on here down in the second filter of Blades. I have it in audio rate oscillator mode. So it's self-resonating as a kind of analog oscillator that starts as like a very pure kind of sine wave like tone. I have a dummy cable patched into the in, so it's only going to be self-oscillating. There's a pattern over here in channel A. The guitar is coming from channel B of Ornament and Crime, but channel A has another pattern that Ears is triggering. And Ears is kind of triggering two things. One, the note being played on Ornament and Crime, and also another segment on stages doing a pretty long attack and release envelope that is going to be controlling this fourth channel of Veils. So this doesn't sound like a pure sine wave though, because the output of this second half of Blades is going back into, I think it's mode? No, it's drive. As well as I have this final channel of Veils in like a kind of parabolic mode, so it's really loud, and we're actually getting overdrive from Veils here that I can control with this offset knob. So I'll be doing that a little bit to kind of mimic the resonance of the guitar. You'll also notice the drums are coming through. So what's going on there, this is kind of fun. The auxiliary out from Plaits is going into the mode of Blades. So we're actually filtering at audio rate when we're getting a drum signal to kind of actually add these kind of bubbly drum sounds on top of the lead voice. So you'll only hear that when the envelope is high for this. So if early in the song, we're gonna have a kind of very short envelope. But when we get to the second half, we'll open it up. So we'll hear the drums a little bit more in that second half. And I have to remain mindful to kind of like modulate the offset manually as we go through it. So now that we've got all the different instruments, we can try a little playthrough of this track. Let's do it. So I think we have everything set up. Let's plug these back in. Let's plug this back in. We want to start this low. And our reverb looks good. Of course, we want the drums in here. We want the guitar. And it's pretty important to start all of these patterns on the same beat. So we'll wait for the last note of the second phrase, the kind of A chord. Here we go. All right, let's try playing it. Kind of start with the tape. One, two, three. You want to make sure that the count is correct at the start here so that it will match the tape throughout the whole performance. And I like to give kind of 4 bars here so that the listener can kind of get used to what we're doing with rhythms before we bring in the lead for the first time. So we'll wait till the end of this one. And here's the first appearance of the lead with a short envelope. Oh, I had it in the wrong spot. So let's do it. Let's play it correctly here. All right, let's try it one more time. Get ready and switch this. So I've kind of botched the first melody because I didn't have ornament and crime in the right place, but we'll get it the second time. Let's increase our envelope. And mistakes will be made. I'd usually have to redo the track, but we'll keep going. So give the audience a second to kind of listen to the steel guitar edition and the new samples before we bring in the second melody. Here we go. Let's get this right. Yeah, a little bit better this time. We're going to transition now into the more ambient part of the track, where we can really hear a little bit of the guitar and the new samples playing from the Disting. I use Plancks over here as a kind of a meta module to control a lot of values across the boards. So I've set a keyframe that kind of turns off the drums, basically. After 4 bars of this, we'll start to bring in a little bit of the reverb. It's a little dreamier. We'll start to bring in more of the shimmer down here. Not all the way yet. Go all the way here. And I'll start to bring in more of those samples. More shouts, less percussion. Got the shimmer at about 75%. Crank it to 100. Kind of let the tape finish the track, but since it's going through the FX aid along with the percussion, we have this kind of completely washed out version of it. We've kind of timed it perfectly, so the tape is over. Okay, turn that off. Let all the reverb fade away. And that's the end of this track. So one thing you probably noticed in that performance was I had a big error in the lead melody when I first brought it in. Let's listen to that one more time here. Kind of go back to this keyframe. If you want to hear me not mess it up, the full track is listed below. Down under all these wires, the way all these sounds are coming together, as I unpatch here, is through Nearness and HPO. Nearness is great, little panning module. They'll take a series of signals, like I think 7 signals, and spread them across the stereo field.